शट डाउन हो गए ना,
फिर
हम नहीं आइसक्रीम खा पाए। हम पापा के साथ जाते थे पार्क वार, अब मत नहीं जा सकते हैं, वहाँ पे बंद होगा, हम अब आइसक्रीम नहीं खा सकते हैं।
हमारा फ्यूचर भी ख़राब हो गया। मैं इंजीनियर बनना चाहती हूँ, लेकिन यहाँ की हालत की लगता है कि इंजीनियर बनना बहुत मुश्किल है। हमारे सर पर डिप्रेशन हो गया। हम उठते हैं सुबह, सिर्फ सुनते हैं 1 मर गया, 2 मर गए, वो मर गए, किसी की आंखें ब्लाइंड हो गई।
Anyone who's listening to this is aware of December 6th, 1992, the day that probably changed India forever, the day Babri Masjid was demolished. But today, we go back one day in past, that will be December 5th, 1992, and we move to Srinagar for a story that is either missing from mainstream consciousness or has been completely misrepresented. Before that day though, in 1990, the JKLF, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front, announced creation of an interim government of Jammu and Kashmir, a government in exile, if you will. And one of the ministers appointed in that government was a man called Hriday Nath. It must come as a big surprise to a lot of you to find out that a Kashmiri Pandit, a local Kashmiri, was part of a government in exile that was led by JKLF. But that was the Kashmir that has been erased from our memories. Vanchu was an activist and pioneer of workers' movement and trade unions in the state, so a communist. Hriday Nath Vanchu was the first one who filed the cases of Kunan Poshpada victims, documenting hundreds of cases of extrajudicial killings, and prepared habeas corpus petitions on behalf of detainees held illegally in secret detention centers in Kashmir. It was the effort of Hriday Nath Vanchu that international organizations like Amnesty International, Asia Watch, and many others took note of human rights violations in Kashmir. He also formed Hindu Welfare Forum, wherein he organized minorities after the episodes of migration. He was assassinated by unidentified gunmen on December 5th, 1992. Because he was Hindu, the government found his work particularly embarrassing. It could not dismiss him as a militant, although Indian officials claimed persons responsible for his death were militants. Many human rights activists who investigated the case have alleged that the 2 members of the militant organization Jamiatul Mujahideen were released from jail on condition that they get Mr. Vanchu. At least one of the militants was subsequently killed by Indian security forces. On that day, he received a call that a son of a Safai Karmchari was detained by forces illegally and they needed his help, and so he went and on his way was assassinated. Subsequently, the Human Rights Watch released a book on Kashmir and dedicated it to Mr. Hriday Nath Vanchu, and his work was commemorated. So on December 6th, the valley was on a self-imposed bandh, 3-day bandh, not ordered by the government, but by the people as they were mourning the death of one of their own. To date, Indian authorities have provided no credible motive for any militant group to assassinate Mr. Vanchu. Why would they? Because for the government, he was technically working for these guys, right? In fact, a senior Indian government official told Asia Watch that what happened to him was on the orders of state governor. And those orders were carried out under the direction of the Inspector General of the BSF, Border Security Forces. And the militants apprehended were later reported to have been shot while escaping the prisons, an occurrence that happens all too often. This is coming from the writing of Amit Vanchu, who is the grandson of Hriday Nath Vanchu and a human rights activist for Watch Asia. Where does Kashmir start? Is there a day zero that we should pick from where it gets easier to understand the problem that is Kashmir today? At one point, Kashmir must have been inhabited by all non-Muslims, as Islam as a religion came into being in 7th century. But if we go by that logic, then why just Kashmir? I assume there was no Muslim in India before the middle of the 8th century, so technically the whole land till Afghan Myanmar is Hindu, or as people say, Sanatan. But we do not see any quarrels over these lands, just Kashmir. So it is important to pinpoint a specific point after which we can discuss the issue of Kashmir as the problem it is today. there is a WhatsApp forward that I received sometime. Actually, it was before the era of WhatsApp forwards. It was an email back then when you received forwarded emails. The email could be true or fabricated. I lean toward fabrication, but I cannot confirm. The email went like this, that an Indian official in the United Nations started his speech after a Pakistani official had given his speech on Kashmir. The Indian official started with, when Rishi Kashyap was meditating in Srinagar, some Muslim militants came and took away his clothes. At that point, the Pakistani UN official stood up and said, "Hey, sir, during when Rishi Kashyap was in Kashmir, there were no Muslims in Kashmir. So how can this be possible?" And the Indian official says, "Precisely. And now I will start my speech." You see what I'm saying? So it is easy to kind of fall into that trap. But I wanted to talk about Kashmir in a way that is more rooted in reality. So let us go in 1846. Kashmir Valley was given to the Dogra Kingdom of Jammu, ruled by Gulab Singh. The Treaty of Amritsar, signed on March 16, 1846, formalized the arrangements in the Treaty of Lahore between the British East India Company and Gulab Singh Dogra after the First Anglo-Sikh War. The Treaty of Amritsar marked the beginning of Dogra rule in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, after which a revolt took place when Imaduddin, the then governor under Sikh rule in Kashmir, rebelled with the help of Kashmir's hill tribes and resisted and refused to surrender the territory to Dogras after that Treaty of Amritsar, through which Kashmir in that treaty was sold to Maharaj Gulab Singh and Dogra rule for, and again, I cannot confirm, but for a very paltry sum. I think some people say 2 rupees, but I cannot confirm. The people who were killed in this resistance were buried in a Srinagar locality which is now named as Shahid Ganj. The Kashmir Valley was paying higher taxes than the Jammu region, and certain groups were debarred by the Dogras to leave the valley. So, on April 29th, 1865, shawl weavers rebelled against Dag Shawl Department of the Dogra rulers. The reason behind the revolt was extremely difficult working conditions, meager wages, excessive taxation, and a ban to leave the Kashmir Valley. The weavers staged a protest outside the house of Pandit Raj Kagdhar, the top Dogra official in charge of the department, in city's Zaldagar locality. The Dogra army charged at the protesting weavers and drowned 28 of them. This led to an uprising which was, however, crushed by the Dogra army. Remember, this revolt began as an employee protest that turned bloody. These facts are very important when we look at Kashmir Valley through a prism of this religious division. Importantly, under the Dogra rule, the Hindus faced a more comfortable treatment from the kings and thereby enjoyed all the highest positions within the kingdom. And there was a clear division between the rich Kashmiri Pandit and the usually peasant Kashmiri Muslim in the valley. And because Kashmiri Pandits' lesser proclivity to learn Urdu and more concentration on Sanskrit and Hindi, which were seen as outsider languages by the majority of Kashmiri Muslims, the two communities, although living as neighbors, had always had rifts between them. In July 13, 1931, across Jammu and Kashmir, a resistance began from Jammu against the sacrilege of Quran by the soldiers of Dogra ruler Hari Singh. There were massive protests in Kashmir. The struggle began as a movement against this act of sacrilege, but soon turned into a struggle for the ouster of the Dogra autocratic rule. 31 protesters were killed when Dogra army opened fire at them during the trial of the leader of this agitation, Abdul Qadir. Sheikh Muhammad Abdullah came to limelight soon after this incident, who later framed the discourse of Kashmir's freedom from autocratic Dogra rule, although Muslim conference led by Sheikh was at the forefront of this struggle. Sheikh renamed it as National Conference on secular principles to include the minorities, especially Kashmiri Pandits, in its fold on June 11, 1939. This led to the first fissure in Kashmir's revolt for freedom, dividing it along ideological lines. While Sheikh professed a secular and socialist agenda, Mirwais Umar Farooq's grand uncle, Mirwais Yusuf Shah, and Chaudhry Ghulam Abbas stuck to Muslim conference, making the religious identity of Kashmiri Muslims and the focus of their struggle against the Dogra rule. So now there was a national conference and a Muslim conference. This internal chasm, in fact, played an important role in 1947, when Sheikh rejected the two-nation theory and decided to go with India, rather than siding with the newly born state of Pakistan on the basis of Jammu Kashmir being a Muslim-dominated princely state. The Muslim Conference, however, sought Kashmir's accession with Pakistan. Today, the Jammu Kashmir Liberation Front is seeking an independent, secular and united Jammu and Kashmir, while Sayyid Ali Shah Jilani-led Hurriyat staunchly supports Kashmir's accession with Pakistan. The discourse might have substantially changed since the Mughal invasion of Kashmir 423 years ago, but the feeling of separation exists from the last 500 years. The British departure from the subcontinent in August 1947 caused two significant changes in Jammu and Kashmir. First, Maharaja Hari Singh lost his guarantor, the British. No longer could he impose his will, almost with impunity, on the people of Jammu and Kashmir, knowing that the British would support him or at worst ignore his actions. Neither could he rely on the British Indian government to control subcontinental politicians. Nor could he call on the support of British India's military to quell internal uprisings, as he had done in 1931, or to police J&K's porous border and keep out any intruders. Instead, Hari Singh came under increasing pressure from the new leaders of India and Pakistan over the accession issue, over the welfare of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and over the release of each dominion's respective political surrogates then languishing in J&K's jails. A further factor motivating Punchis in 1947 was the creation of Pakistan and the Maharaja's reaction to their support for it. The transfer of British power to the new dominions of India and Pakistan, coupled with Hari Singh's vacillation on the accession, inspired much interest, even fervor, among the people of Jammu and Kashmir. In Punch, many people were already identifying themselves with Pakistan. From 14th August, the day before Pakistan became a legal entity and a physical reality, pro-Pakistan, anti-Maharaja meetings took place in Punch, even though public meetings were banned. Many Punchis declared their desire for J&K to join Pakistan, particularly on Pakistan Day, August 14th, when they raised Pakistani flags and supported the Muslim Conference's unequivocal pro-Pakistan stance. Motivated by these various factors, disgruntled Punchis also engaged in actions against the Maharaja to protect their identity and themselves. Anti-Maharaja activity possibly commenced as early as February 1947 and almost certainly was occurring by June 1947, when Punchis mounted a no-tax campaign. A press note issued on 12 September by the J&K government confirms this campaign. Early in August, in Punch Jagir, evilly disposed persons launched a violent agitation against the administration of the Jagir in favor of civil disobedience and no-tax campaign. This is from the J&K government before 47. The Muslim unrest may also have included a no-rent element, a distinct possibility given the Punchis' grievances over their own land. The Maharaja and his armed forces moved to suppress this campaign. Around 15th August, they may also have begun to repress Muslims by killing them or by forcibly disarming them. A 1948 publication stated that hundreds of people in Bagh, a district in Poonch, were killed at a hoisting of the Pakistani flag to celebrate Independence Day. Two short telegrams to Jinnah on 29th August from the Muslims of Poonch and the Muslims of Bagh also spoke of anti-Muslim brutality by the Maharaja's forces. Around the same time, the Muslim Conference politicians who became the founder president of Azad Kashmir, Sardar Muhammad Ibrahim Khan from Rawalkot in Poonch, was quoted by a 1949 publication as stating that the Maharaja had unleashed a reign of terror on 24th August 1947 that killed 500 people. While the number of casualties cannot be confirmed, shoot-on-sight orders were definitely in place till September 2nd, 1947. The reaction of the ruler's predominantly Hindu army to Poonch Muslims' pro-Pakistani activities boosted the anti-Maharaja cause in Poonch and incited Poonchis to take further action. In response to incidents around Poonch that invariably involved Muslims, the Maharaja's army fired on crowds, burned houses and villages indiscriminately, plundered, arrested people and imposed local martial law. And as the troubles continued, the state forces were compelled to deal with it with a heavier hand every next time. Until such oppressive actions, the anti-Maharaja cause probably had little backing beyond Poonch. But after that, substantial men told Simons, that Simons was journalist recording this, that they would never have joined such a rash enterprise opposing the Maharaja but for the folly of the Dogras who burnt whole villages where only a single family was involved in the revolt. Such folly motivated some Punch Muslims to organize a people's resistance movement. News is rife that Arundhati Roy will be arrested for her speech proclaiming that Kashmir should be free from India. Kashmir is an integral part of India, but somehow we need more than 600,000 security personnel to have some 6.9 lakh people remain integrated with us. With more soldiers, the integration is believed to have become stronger, as we are told by the media. So when Arundhati Roy gave that hate speech in courts, what did she say right after that? I'm quoting this from her own essay. I write this from Srinagar, Kashmir. This morning's papers say that I may be arrested on charges of sedition for what I have said at recent public meetings on Kashmir. I said what millions of people here say every day. I said what I, as well as other commentators, have written and said for years. Anybody who cares to read the transcripts of my speeches will see that they were fundamentally a call for justice. I spoke about justice for the people of Kashmir, who live under one of the most brutal military occupations in the world. For Kashmiri Pandits, who live out the tragedy of having been driven out of their homeland. For Dalit soldiers killed in Kashmir, whose graves I visited on garbage heaps in their villages, in Kodalur. For the Indian poor, who pay the price of this occupation in material ways, and who are now learning to live in the terror of what is becoming a police state. Yesterday, I travelled to Shopian, the apple town in South Kashmir, which had remained closed for 47 days last year, in protest against the brutal rape and murder of Asiya and Nilofer, the young woman whose bodies were found in a shallow stream near their homes and whose murderers have still not been brought to justice. I met Shakil, who is Nilofer's husband and Asiya's brother. We sat in a circle of people crazed with grief and anger, who had lost hope that they would ever get insaf, justice, from India, and now believed that Azadi, freedom, was their only hope. I met young stone pelters who had been shot through their eyes. I travelled with a young man who told me how 3 of his friends, teenagers in Anantnag district, had been taken into custody and had their fingernails pulled out as punishment for throwing stones. In the papers, some have accused me of giving hate speeches, of wanting India to break up. On the contrary, what I say comes from love and pride. It comes from not wanting people to be killed, raped, imprisoned, or have their fingernails pulled out in order to force them to say they are Indians. It comes from wanting to live in a society that is striving to be a just one. Pity the nation that has to silence its writers for speaking their minds. Pity the nation that needs to jail those who ask for justice. While communal killers, mass murderers, corporate scamsters, looters, rapists, and those who prey on the poorest of the poor roam free. Here I am using the words of Sanjay Kak, a renowned documentary filmmaker whose documentary Jashn-e-Azadi on Kashmir is a must-watch as far as I am concerned. He says, "What can we say with certainty? We can say that from the middle of 1989 onwards, Kashmir witnessed the targeted killings of several significant figures of its Hindu minority, leading to widespread panic and insecurity. In these same months, many Muslims were also assassinated in Kashmir. Political workers, policemen, and government officials. All this was part of the wider political upsurge of this period, presaging events that were to soon upturn the established order of things. We also know that early in 1990s, some Kashmiri Pandits' families began to flee in fear. Their leaving was probably intended as a temporary move that was to prove tragically permanent for most. In the decade that followed, Kashmir continued to be raked by mass protests as well as a full-blown armed uprising that aimed at nothing less than freedom from India. The brutal counterinsurgency that followed was to overwhelm life for all those who lived in Kashmir. And the violence and continuing fear led to steady departures of its Pandit minority, and also of a significant number of Muslims. We know that the final wave of Kashmiri Pandit departures followed two horrific massacres of 23 civilians at Wandama in 1998 and of 24 men, women and children at Nadi Marg in 2003. We also know that despite all this, at least 4,000 Kashmiri Pandits never left their homes. They have continued to live in Kashmir, not in secure ghettos, but scattered across the valley, living in what often feels like a war zone. Without extended networks of family and community, their lives are not easy. But nor is life easy for their Muslim neighbors, with whom they live in what has come to be recognized as one of the most militarized zones in the world. Even as a large number of critics found the film Kashmiri Files, and this is what he was talking about, filled with factual inaccuracies, propagandist and frightening in its relentless targeting of every Muslim represented on screen, the film continued its blitz across the box office in India. Mobilized by the cadres of the right-wing groups of men showed up at theatres waving the Indian tricolour. Screenings frequently ended amid sloganeering and speeches with people competing in their provocations, with brazen calls for violence against all Muslims, not just Kashmiri Muslims. These highly visible reactions were amplified through the extensive social media infrastructure of the right wing, what is often derisively called the WhatsApp University. Through all of this, it was relentlessly undermined that the Kashmir Files is revealing a truth that had been suppressed in the past. The assertion that this truth was suppressed was odd, given that the BJP and its cohort have aggressively promoted their version of events in Kashmir since at least the mid-1990s. In this version, the expulsion of the Kashmiri Pandits was dated to one day, January 19, 1990. Accompanied by an insistence that their exodus was the consequence of widespread killings, the looting and burning of Pandit homes and temples, and a high incidence of sexual violence against Pandit women. The community were victim of a genocide. The argument went, and this was framed as part of the larger threat to Hindu civilization that only the BJP and its cohort could counter. Although my own interest, Sanjay Kak is saying, was in the facts surrounding the flight of the Kashmiri Pandits, I was also curious about the truth that was being alluded to in the film. For everything around that period has long remained shrouded, not least because it never received any serious attention from journalists and scholars, and certainly not from the government, state or federal, not even when it was led by the BJP. The simplest questions failed to yield reliable answers. How many Kashmiri Pandits lived in the valley prior to 1990? The figures conjured up by the right wing fluctuate between 500,000 and 700,000, although considered estimates place it about 170,000. How many of them left the Kashmir Valley after 1990? A recent response by the region's Relief and Rehabilitation Commission placed the figure at 135,426. Although on inflamed television debate, the needle again fluctuates between 500,000 and 700,000 and can inexplicably go up to 1 million. How many Kashmiri Pandits were killed in the conflict? In conversations around the Kashmir Files, the figure has hovered around 4,000, although the most recent figures provided by the region's police department put it at 89. Earlier official estimates had said 270, while Kashmiri Pandit Sangharsh Samiti, a Kashmir-based citizens group, had arrived at a figure of about 700. When did they leave? And that most vexed of all question. What were the circumstances that made people leave? None of these can be answered with any degree of certainty. Now onto the film Kashmir Files. Presented as a work of fiction, the Kashmir Files is freed of the constraints that the facts gathered by its makers may pose. The film is therefore able to give a potent form to something that the right wing has been cooking for more than 3 decades. A singular version of what they call the truth of Kashmir. It is arrived at here by picking a few dreadful events from across a decade and a half of Kashmir's recent history, and telescoping them into a gruesome narrative that spans what appears to be a year. This compression of a tragic event is then heaped upon a single fictive family, and if that burden of sorrow was not already unbearable, embroidered with further acts of unspeakable cruelty, such as when a diabolic militant commander forces a woman to swallow uncooked rice soaked in the blood of her just murdered husband. This incident references the brutal 1990 slaying of B.K. Ganju, a Pandit killed while hiding in drum of rice in the attic of his home. The twist with the blood-soaked rice seems a more recent add-on. When asked about the incident some weeks ago, Ganju's brother said he had never heard of it and that his sister-in-law had never mentioned it either. Such egregious interpolations come along with more insidious ones. At a ration depot, a group of distraught Kashmiri Pandit women are denied access to food grain by their Muslim neighbors. Although this fact remains unverifiable, the extreme dehumanization evinced in this unverifiable incident sets the tone for a more serious claim that conditions in Kashmir in 1990 met the definition of genocide. By the way, that rice, blood-soaked rice, was actually from the Naxal Bengal in the 70s, and that incident that was directly transposed into this movie in Kashmir Files. This is a film that brutalizes its audience with sense of such extreme violence that it eventually silences the possibility of considering any alternative narratives. Although terrible tragedies did happen to many individuals, mostly Kashmiri Pandits, they were not betrayed by their Muslim neighbors. While some properties were torched and destroyed, most temples and homes were not ransacked or looted, and many more have run to ruin over years of neglect. And although elements in the media, the bureaucracy, and the police may well have been neglectful of their responsibilities, not everyone, as the film suggests, colluded in the persecution of the Pandits. Most critically, this myopic narrative succeeds in obscuring the fact that what happened in Kashmir in the 1990s was not centrally a conflict between Muslims and Hindus. It was an uprising against the Indian state. It did not arrive overnight either, but had a past which could be dated to at least to 1947 and the vivisection of the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir, and it came with a history that included other massacres and large-scale movements of population. In constructing the truth about Kashmir, one of the carcasses of facts in irresponsibly mixing these with inflammatory fictions, the Kashmir Files hints at the larger agenda. This is articulated most clearly in a long monologue delivered toward the end of the film by its central protagonist, Krishna. All of India's greatness is tied in with Kashmir, the young man suggests, and that is where everything flourished in ancient time. Its scholarship, its science, medicine, its theatre, grammar, and literature. Kashmir was a special place, our own Silicon Valley, he says, in a banal but probably accurate rendition of what he has in mind. The departure of the Kashmiri Pandits in the 1990s signals the absolute nadir to which Hindu civilization has been brought since, presumably by Muslim rule. And that shame must be corrected. The monologue suggests that the film is interested in more than setting right the truth about Kashmir in the 1990s. It is in fact positing a new one. This time constructed around the idea of the homeland, not just for Kashmiri Pandits, but for all of Hindus. For over 3 decades, the BJP and its progenitors, the RSS, successfully energized a substantial Hindu vote bank around a promise. Their willful destruction of the Babri Masjid in Ayodhya in 1992 was meant to obliterate the shame of a mosque built upon the exact birthplace of Lord Ram, several centuries before. The campaign to construct a magnificent temple at its site provided the lifeblood to its politics for almost a generation and swept the BJP to power in India. In the symbolic imagination of the RSS and of the other progenitors of the BJP, Kashmir has long waited in the wings. With the Kashmir Files, it is being yanked center stage as a symbolic space that the forces of Hindutva can draw upon in the upcoming decades. That is why the formulations provided by the film have already become sacrosanct. And any challenge to it, anything that suggests a different view of events, no matter how small, must be silenced. If this means denying space to the view of those few Pandits who actually continue to live in Kashmir, or to those Pandits who live in the squalid refugee tenements in Jammu, if it means ignoring their pleas to not further inflame tensions between Hindus and Muslims, so be it. What does bother one now is that today Arundhati Roy has UAPA file against her. We live in such a place where we possibly cannot even imagine discussing something like the trial of Afzal Guru and his hanging. It is a given that being an Indian national, you have to worship the Indian army.
By the time you are listening to this, a lot must have happened, और बहुत कुछ देख लिया होगा और बहुत कुछ ओपिनियंस बना लिए होंगे. मेरा रिसेंटली मैंने एक न्यूज लॉन्ड्री में भी एक पीस लिखा. आई एम होपिंग कि आप लोगों ने वो पढ़ा है, और नहीं भी पढ़ा है तो पढ़ लेना एट सम पॉइंट। मुझे जब भी ऐसी कोई ट्रेजेडी होती है ना, तो 3 पॉइंट ऑफ व्यूज के बारे में मैं सोचता हूँ, राइट? फर्स्टली, जो पीपल हु सफर्ड दिस, सेकेंडली द पीपल हु आर लिविंग इन कश्मीर राइट नाउ, and the Kashmiris who live in the rest of India, and the rest of India, and what the rest of India, you know, sees and looks at and feels about Kashmir. जिनके साथ ये हुआ है, उनके लिए ये ट्रेजेडी है, उनके लिए ट्रेवेस्टी है, और उनसे एंगर और सैडनेस के अलावा कोई भी और एक्सपेक्टेशन करना बेईमानी होगा, you know. This is why a doctor is not asked to, you know, operate on their own relatives. Because that will not be fair. तो वो क्या बोल रहे हैं और क्या सोच रहे हैं वो इम्पोर्टेंट इस हद तक है कि उनका दुख मिसयूज तो नहीं किया जा रहा है। वो हाउ डज दिस होल थिंग इफेक्ट द पीपल लिविंग इन कश्मीर? नाउ दिस इज वेयर कश्मीर एंड एवरीवन एल्स इन देयर व्यूज ऑन कश्मीर कम्स टू काइंड ऑफ फ्रंट। जो कश्मीर में रहता है वो क्या फील कर रहा है इस चीज के बारे में, इस इवेंट के बारे में, ये वाइल इस इवेंट के साथ देखना इंपॉर्टेंट है, पर उस वैक्यूम के बियॉन्ड भी देखना इंपॉर्टेंट है, बिकॉज कोई भी चीज खाली वैक्यूम में नहीं होती है। नॉट दैट दिस इवेंट इज जस्टिफाइड इन एनी वे। दीज पीपल हैव फेस्ड अ लॉट ओवर द लास्ट many decades. सवाल ये है कि दिस इज कश्मीर इज द मोस्ट मिलिटराइज्ड जोन इन द वर्ल्ड। मैं किसी का सोशल मीडिया, किसी का ट्वीट देख रहा था, जो कोई इंडियन है जो किसी कश्मीर पाकिस्तानी का मजाक उड़ा रहा था कि पाकिस्तानी सेड कि कश्मीर इज द मोस्ट मिलिटराइज्ड जोन, हाउ डिड दिस हैपन देयर, ब्ला ब्ला ब्ला, एंड दिस वाज लाइक, oh, you are saying this, but you live in Pakistan, which has been under military dictatorship, which is true, but the thing is that does not, you know, it's not, you know, refutable point for the fact that Kashmir में हर 3 normal citizens को काउंट करने पे एक आर्मी मैन विद एन AK-47 एग्जिस्ट करता है। तो उस जगह पर ऐसा कुछ होना क्या बताता है? बताता ये है कि either the government and the security forces got complacent, they just drank their own Kool-Aid, और उनको लगा कि हमारा कोई कुछ नहीं उखाड़ सकता है, या आई डू नॉट इवन नो कि वो व्हाट दे वर थिंकिंग एट दैट पॉइंट। और दूसरा ये चीज कि जब लाइक दैट थिंग्स आर नॉट नॉर्मल इन कश्मीर। Amit Shah said in an election rally last year that Kashmir has been the safest it has ever been, and the thing is that you've had Pulwama like 5 years ago, and now you've had this, and it's not like these are the only 2 events that have happened. Chutput killings have been happening, it's just that the mainstream media is not showing them. हो ये रहा है, जो चीज मुझे बॉदर करती है कि एट द एंड ऑफ लाइक, पहले ये होता था 2008 में या उससे पहले 14 के पहले कि ऐसा कुछ इवेंट होता था और होम मिनिस्टर्स वुड रिजाइन। आज ये होता है कि कोई भी ऐसा इवेंट होता है तो पीपल डू नॉट expect the government to do anything. People, in fact, the government feels more strong, like strengthened. और ये not just Kashmir, but like railway accidents, हर चीज में इस तरीके से हो रहा है, जहाँ पे government feels more powerful and more vindicated somehow about, you know, what has happened. तो हम भी ये सोचे कि हमारा रिलेशनशिप हमारी गवर्नमेंट के साथ कैसा बन गया है। पाकिस्तानियों को देख रहा था, they're making memes and all of that, but they are also surprised at how easily, like, we as in the people of India, the media, the civil society in India is taking the government talking point and just, you know, putting it out. And what is happening right now, अभी जब मैं ये रिकॉर्ड कर रहा था तो ये है कि यूट्यूबर्स और कंटेंट क्रिएटर्स के अगेंस्ट FIR आ गई है सवाल पूछने के लिए। नेहा सिंह राठौर, मिस मेडुसा who's been on our pod as well. And then there are Pakistani YouTubers and podcasts जिनको इंडिया में बैन कर दिया गया, और फिर कश्मीर में लोगों के घरों को बुलडोजर जस्टिस जो भी कहते हैं वो कर रहे हैं। नेशनलिज्म के नाम पे हम अपने ही सिटीजन्स पे गुस्सा निकाल रहे हैं, उनके घरों पे बुलडोजर चला रहे हैं, कलेक्टिव पनिशमेंट दे रहे हैं। हिस्ट्री ये बोलती है कि when, you know, authoritarian regimes go to this degree where they would much rather take on their own citizens than actual justice, the public trust breaks down. And I don't know that, I don't see that happening in India right now. So I don't really know how this pans out. The एक चीज मैं like I want to make very clear that it seems like everyone wants some sort of retaliation from India, and possibly there will be some retaliation. And again, look at it, like how it kind of, in the grand scheme of things, ends up benefiting our supreme Jethalal. But क्या रिटेलिएशन होगा अगर फिर से एयरफोर्स जाती है और कुछ होता है वहां पे और कोई हमारा पायलट वहां पे गिर जाता है, हाउ विल वी रिएक्ट टू इट? या if you use some sort of missile system, Pakistan is a nuclear powered country, and if they see a missile coming at them and they don't know if it is a normal missile or a nuclear missile, what do you expect them to do? These things first have to have a diplomatic channel, and I get it कि people are angry at Pakistan. They seem that जो भी है, like, you know, we have to take it out on Pakistan. But remember that we live in India, we have people and families in India, and well, when we are thinking of war, we are only thinking of the border areas and all of that. But in this time and age, Delhi is just 300 kilometers from Lahore. So no matter how evil you feel Pakistan is, you have to be more thoughtful about what you do. Finally, I don't know, but the way our media is, how much can we even say that we, and by we I mean those who think they are on the left liberal side and, you know, still have the ability to ask questions, are not being brainwashed. जब कॉन्स्टेंटली हमारे आसपास इस तरीके से, यू नो, ड्रामा चल रहा है बेसिकली, चिल्लाने का, मेलो ड्रामा, न्यूज एंकर्स का, तो it is very normal to kind of think of it in those terms. I mean, already बालाकोट और उसके बाद एक प्रेसिडेंट सेट हो गया है जहां पर अटैक हुआ था आर्मी पे, यहाँ पर तो it is civilians. So like you would expect these people to be even more violent. I don't know where it kind of leaves us. Nobody is asking कि भाई ये लोग 400 किलोमीटर अंदर इंडियन बॉर्डर के कैसे आ गए, और अगर ये लोग बाहर से नहीं आए और ये कश्मीरी है तो भाई आर्टिकल 370 हटाने से, मोस्ट पीसफुल बनाने से कश्मीर को क्या फायदा हुआ? और अगर ये इतनी स्ट्रॉन्ग नेशनलिस्ट गवर्नमेंट है जो 56 इंच है और ये यू नो, तो क्या पॉइंट है अगर ये चीजें वैसी ही रहनी है? फाइनली, व्हाट डू वी फील अबाउट कश्मीर? डज when we say Kashmir is our Atoot Ang, do we mean that land or do we mean the people? Because if we mean it to be the people of Kashmir, then does any of our behavior around this make an average Kashmiri feel more Indian? And if we mean land, just land, then what does it mean for people? And what do you want to do with, you know, millions of people who are living there? There is another angle about the Muslims living in the rest of India as well. And I know that I am talking to people who already agree with me. But every passing day, their citizen, you know, rights as citizen is being curbed, controlled. And after this government will get even more capital to do more of these things. उस चीज को, like, how do we plan to talk about it, handle it? I asked Aditya and Nishant to be here and talk about Kashmir, but it is expected. Yeah? Like, what new thing then can we say that we have not said already? I am just so heartbroken at this tragedy, and I'm also very scared about how this is going to pan out for India and for South Asia. And no matter what we say and what we feel, I just want to make it very clear that जितना भी righteous indignation और गुस्सा हमें उन लोगों की तरफ, पाकिस्तान की तरफ आ रहा है, ये सब makes the hand of this current government stronger. And you cannot escape this question that even if this is all being done by Pakistan, is it not almost like a dream come true for these people? And if so, if they had the chance to do something like this, would they have done anything differently?
जब मैं अगले दिन आर्टिकल 37 के दिन गया ना, तो यहाँ से स्कूल ही बंद थे। मैं स्पीकिंग कंपटीशन था उस दिन।
अच्छा,
सबसे गंदा यही लगा कि मैंने इतनी प्रैक्टिस की थी, उसका कुछ फल नहीं मिला।
आपको पता है आर्टिकल 370 क्या है? हाँ, क्या है? जो ज़मीनें थी किसी ने ली थी या किसी ने दी थी, उस पर मकान बनाया था, अब वो हट गया है, वो सारे वापस देने हैं, वो ज़मीनें वापस देनी है, सब कुछ वापस देना है।
मैंने अपने पापा से सुना था कि ये हटेगा तो यहाँ पर ये ज़मीन हड़प लेंगे बाहर के लोग, लेकिन हमें ये ज़मीन नहीं बेचनी चाहिए, पहले हमें फिर सड़क पे आना पड़ेगा। हम खेलते थे, जब भी हम स्कूल जाते थे मैं मजे से जाता था स्कूल कि हम आज ये करेंगे और इसको खेलेंगे। तो जब से 3 आर्टिकल के 2 दिन बाद ही यहाँ पर सब कुछ बंद हो गया, शायद पहले दिन से हो गया बंद। हाँ, हम घर पे बैठे होते हैं, कभी हम घर पे ही खेल रहे होते हैं, बाहर निकलने ही नहीं देते थे घर से।
मेरे पापा एक टीचर है, पैसे नहीं थे, स्कूल बंद थे, फी उनको ये फी मतलब ये नहीं मिल रहा था, तनख्वाह नहीं मिल रहा था उनको, इसलिए मेरे अभी भी मेरा फी पेंडिंग है।
मैं अपनी फ्रेंड्स को मिस करती हूँ और टीचर्स को भी मिस करती हूँ, और हमारी जो ये रिश्तेदार है, हमें उनके साथ कांटेक्ट नहीं हो पा रहा है, हमें पता नहीं वो किस हाल में है।